Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nick Olson, and we are here today to talk about sailboat routing. So I'll jump into a screen share and we'll sort of talk a little bit about how we can um, view the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So on my screen here, I have the Predict Wind app and the Predict Wind Offshore app. So to do weather routing, you can use either app. The general difference is the Predict Wind app is what we use when we are at home, at the marina, anywhere we're on a cellular or Wi-Fi connection, high-speed connection. It's what I use nearly every day. And you can do your weather routing in there. You can set your polars, um, all the stuff that we're going to cover off. The reason that we don't use that all the time is that it does not save our data offline. So if we want to save our data offline, we use the Offshore app. And the Offshore app will save everything offline. We can control what we download. We actually download GRIBs, which is just a format that we transfer our weather files. And they are compressed. We can use it on a limited bandwidth connection, such as Iridium Go, Iridium Go Exec, SSB. We can download our weather routing and our weather files onto there. We can also use the Offshore app if we are on a high-speed connection. The reason we would do this, let's say we were using Starlink and on a powerboat, on a yacht, obviously we often trying to conserve power, so we might be turning our Starlink off. This will save all our data so that we can review it whenever until we have turn our connection back on and we can download more data. So recommend using the Offshore app basically anytime you're going out of cell range. Yeah, it's a great piece of software, and we'll have a quick look at that today. What is weather routing? It is a way of letting you know where you're going to be in the future accurately, and the different weather scenarios where you might go to best utilize the weather. Can give you warnings of potential dangers, things that you might need to look out for, things that you might want to avoid. It's not using a weather routing tool is really not an ideal thing to do. The amount of information you get from using the weather routing tool is pretty amazing, and is really where if you're not using a weather routing tool and you're just looking at a weather map alone and trying to do any kind of real passages, you're probably going to come unstuck at some stage. So we use this tool to keep ourselves safe, to plan ahead, and it does a very good job of it. So, we have it's pretty simple how we do it: start point, end point, download. And this is what I mentioned before. We can control our file size, and we can actually, if we're doing a massive passage, we're going from Panama to French Polynesia, we can get 28 days of forecast with the ECMWF ensemble. Of course, we don't route for that many days. We update our route every day, twice a day when the models update, but we can plan longer trips. So, Atlantic crossings, etc. I'll talk about the wave modeling. The wave modeling is awesome. It's one of the best things that we've done in the weather routing tool in the last couple of years. I think it's amazing and amazing for helping with your safety and planning ahead. And that's, you'll hear me talk a bit later about the roll, the vertical acceleration, and the slamming incidents. So, roll sideways, vertical acceleration as you're lifting up and down. So those two together sort of will Obviously, there's the safety aspect, but there's a seasickness aspect, especially with your vertical acceleration. Boat slamming is not something that we ever want. That's sort of going to be your boat breaking stuff, which is not ideal. And how we're calculating that is we're doing a 3D model of your boat, and we are looking at the wind wave, the primary swell, secondary swell, tertiary swell, and putting them together, doing that basic 3D model of your boat, and then that comes out in your weather routes, and we will look at that shortly. So I don't sort of want to look through that too much more. I actually just really want to jump into the tools. Before we do, you'll see my background, automated AI polars. So we are going to talk about polars in a minute, but to do some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, and AI polars would be one of them, is you need a data hub. It's a cool little tool that can do tracking, your polars, over the horizon AIS, all sorts of onboard data in your tracking. If you have a PredictWind tracking page, you can, people watching your tracking page can see your wind speed and direction on board. It's pretty cool. Plugs into your NMEA network, and does really cool stuff. Anyhow, and we'll talk about polars and what they are and why they're important now. So I have come into the PredictWind forecast website. This is the same as the PredictWind app, or very similar. And so again, this is an online when I'm connected tool, and it's slightly different to the Offshore app, but we can do the same stuff. So over here on this left-hand side, I have my menu, and I've got all my forecast tools there, and we should use them and can look at them, especially when we're planning our weather window, big picture stuff when we're looking ahead. But we're here really today, and we do have other webinars that we've done in the past of talking about that sort of thing. But we're really here today to talk about weather routing, and so that's where we're going to go. And so I go to weather routing and sail routing, and this is the page I'm on. Oops, I'll zoom my fingers there. And you'll see here, I've run a weather route. That's great. How did we get there? So if I zoom in a bit here, and I've got my start, and here my green start waypoint, and down here I have my red destination waypoint, and that's cool. I can set those. But before I do that, we need to go and tell the software what kind of boat we've got and a little bit about it. And that's going to mean that this weather route is meaningful for us and for our boat. So we come over here to routing preferences, and we're in sail routing. As I mentioned before, we did just do a powerboat routing webinar, but so we are on a yacht. And here we have these different boat polar types. So if you don't know what a polar is basically how fast we think you're going to go in any given wind and wave condition. And so this first part here is setting up for the wind. So in 15 knots of wind at 60 degrees true wind angle, my boat's going to go 7.5 knots, and then at 135 degrees true wind angle, it's going to go, 8.5 knots. And so we need to know all of those different speeds for each wind condition, so that as the boat goes through as the weather router goes through all the weather systems and the different weather conditions, it's accurately plotting where we're going to be, how long it's going to take us, how fast we're going, and it will optimize our route using those polars. So I have here, boat type, I've clicked on predefined, and this is the easiest starting point, or one of the easiest starting points, is to go on to predefined. And we have a big list of boats here, and you can look through this list. It does go on, and you can find a boat that is either your one or one like it. If you've spent any amount of time on your boat, you've probably got a pretty good idea how fast it goes, and even how fast it goes compared to similar sorts of boats. So if your boat's not on here, there might be one that's similar. Personally, this even if my boat wasn't on here and I was unsure, I would just find one that I kind of thought was pretty close, and I'd choose that. I think it's a much better starting place than trying to sort of guess. So I've got a Fontaine Peugeot in there, and so I'll leave it as that, and I can then use that polar, and you see over here is my polar curve, wind speed and wind speed and angle. So there are other ways to do this, and I will touch on them, and we'll come back to this one here, the sail polar. That's a very basic setup, and we can do that. That's the simplest way, but it's also less accurate than these other ways. So we've got our predefined there. We can copy that over to the advanced polar. So I click that button there, and then I can click on advanced, and this is actually what my polars look like. And so you'll see here, we've got true wind speed down this column here, and we have two blank columns, and then we have true wind angle, boat speed, true wind angle, boat speed. So probably the first time you look at this, it looks pretty complicated. It doesn't need to be, but you can come in here and adjust your numbers if you want to, and that's great. If you have a data hub, you can use an AI polar. Now, what is an AI polar? So what it's actually doing here is it is taking you have to start with something. You need to give it some information to start with. So we could choose a predefined boat, and then we plug our data hub in, we turn this AI polar on, and what it's doing is it's reading your enemy A, and it knows when you're motoring, when you're sailing, when you're actually just going out of the marina. And if it's data that isn't good, it will discard it. And then if you as you sail more, it will slowly update your polar to exactly how you sail your boat. So not what the designer thinks that you do or someone else. And so whether you're the best sailor in the world or just not that good or don't really care how you sail, you like to just sail it so that it's comfortable the whole time. That's fantastic. And the AI polar will adjust your polar to match that. So it's a very cool feature, and the more accurate we can get our polars, the more accurate our weather routing is. So I'm going to go back to the predefined because I don't have I'm not on a boat, and I don't have an AI polar set up, and we'll just stick with that. And it is a great place to start with our predefined polar. So that's our wind speed. So that's our, everything to do with the wind. And then down here, we have our wave polar. So normally when you come down here, it is looking like that. It's off. And I come over here and I click on, and I have enabled my automatic wave polar. This is the one we want to do. The manual wave polar is the old way we used to do it. Don't do it. Use the auto polar over here. It's super clever and gives you some amazing outputs that can really help us make better decisions. So you'll see here, it knows, because I chose a predefined polar, it knows that I've got a catamaran. You can put a monohull in there as well. And I think we're even doing a trimaran. So what do these things mean? Obviously, this is a monohull picture. Our displacement, our waterline length, our hull draft. We're not hull only, we're excluding the keel, and our beam. And so we put those in there, and what the software is going to do is it's going to create a basic 3D model of our boat, and then that 3D model is going to be calculated with our wind polar, and it's going to have this, what we call the wave polar. And so as we go through the different sea states, it's going to give us outputs for our roll, vertical acceleration, also whether the wave is slowing us down or speeding us up. So again, we're just trying to make our polar more accurate. And then I come down here, so we've got our wind and our wave polar set up now, and I can also change these defaults for depth. And so it is going to use, again, this is about more accurate routes. If I'm sailing up the coast and my router is actually bouncing me off the land all the time, you're not actually getting a very accurate route or going across land. And also we know, if it's sailing in 1 meter of water, we can't go into 1 meter of water, and so it's giving us inaccurate routes. So if we use the depth avoidance, I've got this set at 5 meters, and it will use a depth contour of 5 meters as my boundary for my router. Tidal and ocean currents, I can turn that off or on. I'm going to turn it on because I want the router to use the ocean and tidal currents to help give me the best route and use them to my advantage. I can change which global model I'm using there, and to what I prefer. And if you want to know about how you might choose one of those, you can actually look at the SST. We have a tutorial on it, and see which one's doing the best job now. Or you may have experience using a particular one that you know does a good job for whichever area you are in the world. So down here we have advanced routing adjustments. We're not going to look at those because they are a yacht racing tool that we put in there for the IMOCAs, and we don't need to look at that. So we've got our tidal and ocean currents. So tidal currents, we've just modeled 90% of the world's coastlines with tidal currents, and then we have the ocean currents as well. And so the router will use those currents to our best advantage, and it will also give us warnings when we have things like wind against current. So we can see that stuff. So we're all set up in here, and we're happy. And we can come back and change this later if we want to. But for now, we can come over here to sailboat routing. And as I mentioned before, I've got my red destination waypoint there. And then up here, I have my green start waypoint. And I can drag and drop those, or I can come over here, click on this little teardrop icon over on the right hand side, and if I was on a GPS enabled device, I could click on this little button and it would take me to where I am. We don't want to do that because I'm in New Zealand and this is in the States, so let's not. But I can have my route set in here, and I can save different routes. You can see I've done a couple, and that would actually put those start and finish waypoints in, or any other waypoints that I'd added. And so I could add waypoints to my route if I wanted. We generally try and avoid adding waypoints. We let the router do its thing unless we have a good reason, and that might be we want to go around a particular point, or we want to avoid something. And there is another way that we can avoid things. We can put a boundary in that the router will avoid. And so a time where we might do that is if we know that there's a particularly shallow piece of water, a lee shore that we want to give a big wide berth to. We might do that. Or if there was if we looked on the AIS and we can see that there's fishing fleets, we might put a boundary around an area where we know there's fishing fleets from the AIS, and the router will avoid it. So yeah, so we can set our waypoints up using that. If I press that plus button, I would add a waypoint and I can delete it as well. The other thing we can look at before we run our route is I can have my start time as now. And so obviously when we're underway, now is the right thing to do. But if we were going to depart tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon, we can actually move that start time to tomorrow. So I've just changed the date there. I'm a day ahead of most people, depending on where you are in the world, because I'm in New Zealand. But anyway, so I've moved that, but I've got my time zone here is actually US Eastern. So correct for where we are. So I've set that up for tomorrow. I can close that little box there. And because we've got our polars all set up, I can click on calculate and it will calculate our route. And it is literally doing billions of calculations at the moment. The router is looking at every possible scenario that we could take on this route. It's using the dimensions we put in for our boats, so all our polars, our wind atmospheric based polars, and then it's also looking at our wave polar that we put in there. It's looking at our depth avoidance, and also our tidal and ocean currents are being calculated. So you can you start thinking about those parameters together, and you sort of see why you want to have a tool that can do this for you. And so now it's calculated that. You'll see here on this wide view that I have that we can see these little things on the screen. This is the GMDSS forecast that has been converted into a graphic. And so if I click on that graphic, it says low seas, there's a low pressure system, high seas forecast, blah, 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 the numbers there. I click on that and I scroll down, and this highlighted part here tells me what that GMDSS warning is in this instance. And so I know where it is, what it is. If you don't have this setup, reading this GMDSS forecast and working out the bit that's relevant for you can actually be a little bit challenging. And so that was why we developed this GMDSS graphical forecast, so that we can convert those forecasts, which are written by a meteorologist, and you can view them in our software. So let's move on from them and have a look at our route here. And you'll see I've got these little warnings along my route, and my route is actually splitting apart, and with the different weather models. So the different colors are the different weather models, and I can probably scroll forward a little bit and we can see why. And so what it is we run into this bit of light, this light here, and so that's what's splitting the models apart there. If I go over to a different model, and you'll see again we've got these light hairs. What I didn't turn on before, and I should have mentioned when I was in the routing preferences, if I just come back here, is I could have actually turned on the motoring. So I could have put in the motoring setting, and I'm going to motor it 5 knots. If the boat speed in the routing falls below 4 knots, I'm going to turn my motor on because I may not want to be out there. And so if I'd turned that on, I think we probably would have motored through this light wind part, and our routes would all be much closer together. Anyhow, so let's have a little bit of a look at what's going on here. So you'll see this, I've got this little icon showing up here, and it is warning me about 2 things. I have got roll and wind against current. And if I zoom in a bit, it's, to me, just guessing. It looks like it's probably where I'm going through the Gulf Stream. So I've got wind against current. If I just come back a little bit. Yeah, so we've got our wind here, 13 knots. So it's gonna throw up that warning, anything above 12, I think it is. And then if I come over here and click on current, and my currents will load. We're going to be looking at ocean currents here. and this will show us where the Gulf Stream is, and it's exactly where I thought it would be. And so you can see here, it doesn't, we've got our wind coming down here, and we've got our current coming up here at, 2 knots sort of thing. And so it's thrown up that warning. The other thing that it's thrown up is our roll warning. And obviously it thinks that we're going to get chucked around a bit, and we can have a better look at that when we look at the tables. So I'll just zoom out a little bit so that we can have a look at the currents. I think they're always really fascinating to look at. The routing will always try and use the currents to our best advantage to optimize our route. And as you can see, knowing what these currents are doing, even once we've gone through the Gulf Stream, can be pretty critical to our safety. There's a lot going on there. If we get into some strong winds and we've got this, a knot of current with some stronger winds would be pretty nasty. And so here we've got another roll warning. And if I come over here and change this to wave, we might start to see why that is. And so we've got, well, I'm actually going to zoom out so that we can see this, because I think I know what it will be. Yeah, so we've got that big system up above us there, and that would have, as that moves through, it will be throwing up different wave states, and so that's what's giving us this roll, is that it's actually leaving, I'm guessing, a pretty big swell behind. So what we're looking at here is the combined wind wave and swell, and you can see, yeah, obviously up here it's massive, and so that will have an effect down here, 3 meters. That's really big, but I think that we will have a different direction of our wind wave and our primary, and maybe we've got secondary and tertiary swells there as well. So we'll go and have a look at that, and see what we think. We can look at all our different factors here. Probably if you want to really dig into a bit more of the stuff that we do with the routing, probably have a look at some of our other webinars. Our Atlantic crossing ones are pretty good for that. But we have things like CAPE here, which is convective available potential energy. So if we have any high levels of CAPE, which I don't see there, but you can see, if we were down here, we do have some high levels, and if we get CAPE and rain together. So if I just click on rain, and if we have those two parameters together, which it looks like we do here, it is a potential thunderstorm potential. What is happening here is, it looks like the rain also shows us our frontal bands. People are often like, well, where's all the lines on the map? If we know how to look at this stuff, we can actually see that this is our frontal band with the rain. So if we have that frontal band coming over us in our route, and we had CAPE with it as well, we would know it was going to hit us pretty hard. So that's something that we would look at. All right, so let's come over here into our tables and talk a little bit more about the things that we can see in here. So I was just talking about what's happening with our wave stuff. There's 2 ways we can look at that. We can look at the wave table here, which you can see here that earlier on stuff, we have our roll is 4.5. So anything above 4, we consider to be getting pretty rolly. And so when I say the 4.5, that's degrees RMS. So it's not just 4 degrees of roll, it's the root mean square. We don't need to worry too much about what that means. We just know that that threshold above 4 is where we have the line drawn. You might find from experience that you like it to be lower, or you've got a higher threshold, but it's always worth looking at. And when we see these high numbers, let's have a scroll down. And it's not super high throughout these routes. We were looking at the ECMWF before, so let's come down here and find it. And you can see here we've got 5.2, and we've got the wind wave direction is at 22, and the primary swell is at 51. So they're slightly different directions. And they're also, the wind wave is smaller than the primary swell. So that's on top of our primary swell, and it's going a slightly different direction. If we come down here further, you'll see that we actually get we have our wind wave, our primary swell, and then our secondary swell. So this is going to make it even, more uncomfortable. And then we come down here further, which is, I think, where we were looking at before, where that system's passed through, and we're actually getting, the wind wave, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary swell. And they're at different directions, different periods. And so that can make the trip a bit more uncomfortable, but it's still not putting us above our thresholds there. But it's worth noting. Another nice way to look at that is, and how I prefer to look at it, is in the graphs. And I come down here and I can look at a whole host of things. So for my whole trip, I've got my true wind speed. This is the average wind speed. And just checking, I talk a lot, so I was just checking on the time. For the whole passage as I go along, and you'll see that we do have that light bit at the middle, which is making our routes diverge, but the general trend throughout the passage is actually quite similar. If I come down here, true wind angle, so this is where we had rain and cape. This is a nice way to look at it. You can compare them together, and you'll see that it's not actually like we've got the rain, the cape here, and the rain at the same time. So we might want to keep an eye on that. Could we avoid that, or just be aware, that we've got potential for thunderstorms on the 29th, and every time we updated our route, we would look at that and see if we're going to do it. And at that, if that was either on that day or that night, if it was at night, I would be sailing with reduced sail, just in case we do get hit by something a bit nasty. And during the day, if we see anything coming towards us, we'd reduce sail straight away before we get hit. So as you see, as we head down, the temperature increases. Pressure, we can compare the model pressure with our a barometer on board. And this is where we see our wave height, wave direction, and wave period. And if you look at, we can actually change what we're looking at there. And so this is where we can see what we could see in those tables before. So our wind wave, our primary swell, secondary, and tertiary. And so where there's nothing, that's because it's not there. So it doesn't just magic it up. If it's not there, it's not there. And then we can come down here to our outputs for our roll, vertical acceleration, and boat slamming. Now this is the sort of the easy place to come and look. So if you come down here, we can see straight out of the bat that we actually go above that 4-degree threshold. And then for the rest of the journey as well, we're actually pretty close on it. So I would think this is depends what you're up for, but this could be a pretty uncomfortable passage because we're up around that, above that 4-degree or above, close to it, for much of our passage, and so could be pretty rough. And then we've also got our vertical acceleration, which is you're up and down, and so we know that that's going to be pretty rough. So there's a few things that we can think about here. Would we want to do this passage? We could probably go back to the departure planning tool over here, and we could probably run the departure planning and go, okay, if we actually left in 2 days' time, we get a much different route, and it looks much nicer. And then we can come and run our weather routing after we've looked at the departure planning. We might go, okay, we're going to leave on Thursday, and run our weather routing for that time, and come and look at these things. I mean, this is the difference between having a nice passage and what I would think this would be pretty uncomfortable. If we're underway and we see this, we can do multiple things using, our seamanship. What would we do? We could come back to the route and see why this is happening. Do we need to force the router to, in this instance, go south so we get further away from that system? Do we, if it's something that we're going to run into, do we slow down so that it's going to pass in front of us? We can do a whole lot of things, or we're just going to sail straight into it because we just want to, we don't think it's going to be too bad or whatever, but we might change our safety protocol on board. Are we going to, you don't go on deck unless you're tethered on, for example. We might just change our protocol based on what we're seeing here. Down here might be all fine, happy days, but then we get into this stuff and, the rule is you don't go on deck unless you're tethered on, that sort of thing. So, it is very useful information and can be used to help keep us safe. So I will super quickly stop sharing this and I will jump over to the Offshore app and share my map there. And so we are now in the Offshore app, and so you can see it looks pretty similar to where we were. And we've got, I've got a route run in here already. And we've still got this system here, which is showing up in our GMDSS, and and it's actually heading, it shows the direction that it's heading is actually down, so it's heading towards us, so we wouldn't be doing this trip. And we can, we've got all our weather models here, different display types, different parameters. I can turn on the AIS, and I should be able to see my AIS targets, assuming I downloaded them, which perhaps I didn't. No, I didn't, because they're not showing up. And then the GMDSS on and off, and our speed here. So how does this piece of software work really? Over here, if I click on download, so same as before, I've got my green start waypoint and my red destination point set. I can again use the little thing over here to show my lat long, etc. But I come over here and I click on download, and this is where I have all my parameters. And you see here I have got my estimated file size is 1.3 megabytes. Depending on my connection type, if I'm at home on my cell, that's fine. Starlink, fine. But I can change this if I'm on a slower, limited bandwidth connection. I can click on this, use offshore optimized settings, and you'll see that it's instantly changed my file size to 150 kilobytes, which is nice and small. So I have all these different parameters in here that I can change. If I change these, so you see I changed that to 12 hourly time steps in the grid, it changes my file size. I can choose all my models, I can choose my parameters, and each time I do that, it does change my file size. So this is if you're using an Iridium Go or a Go Exec, you need to learn how to manage this stuff. But it knows, the software knows my polars because I've set them up already. And I can adjust stuff in here in the settings. If I want to, I could turn my motoring on, etc. And I could also change my polar percentage up or down and change my night setting. If I was out there and I just was never getting to where the router thought I was going to be. So I click on next, and you see there I didn't have the AIS data on, so let's turn that on. I can get my ocean data. I've already downloaded it, so I don't need to download it again, so I won't. And I just click on next. And if I come here, I can click on download all. It will download all of the stuff, and you'll see it here. It's doing my weather route, and so at the moment it's sent my request off to the servers. It knows, oh look, there's Nick, he's on his Fontaine Peugeot 44, and he's got his polars set at he's got his night setting at 90%, and he's going to motor it at 5 knots if it goes below 4 knots of wind speed, etc. So it knows everything about it, knows my wave setup, and it's calculating all that on the servers. And you see here we have this these dates and times down the side here. So this is when the weather model updated, and we always want to know when the weather model updated. So we want to look at the date and the time. And so I can see here, if I look at them, they are all from this morning, my time's set on Auckland, New Zealand time, and so that's what all these times relate to. And then my weather route is just now 10:44 in the morning here in New Zealand, and it's run my route, and it's given me all of those outputs. So again, we've got the same stuff that we looked at before, and we can have a good look at all this stuff. And it's got all my, if I come down here, it's got my roll, which is through the roof. You know, as soon as we leave the coast, we are getting smashed. So, yep, we wouldn't be doing this passage. Vertical acceleration, again, goes above our 0.2 threshold. Afterwards, after that, once we got, you know, after that time period, it would be nice, but we wouldn't want to get there, especially considering if I come up here and I look at my current, you know, this is when we're going through the Gulf Stream, so not good. I can come back to my map, and you'll see here I now have all of my, oops, I double clicked that. I now have all my AIS targets. And so what this is showing me is all of my AIS targets now within 300 nautical miles of my start position. So at the start of the webinar, I mentioned about how the Data Hub can do this really cool new feature that we have called Over the Horizon AIS. And so it will actually, it's actually getting this information all the time. Now, so why do we want this? I mean, we want to be able to know that, you know, that there's this shipping traffic, you know, these guys are coming up the coast, how fast they're going, you know, we're going to run into this lane of traffic here and when we're going to get there. So with the Over the Horizon AIS, it actually updates this all the time. It's pinging our servers, and it will show your regular, if you have your AIS on, it will show your regular AIS targets from your VHF, and then it will show you our Over the Horizon targets, which is taken from our AIS data, which is a global data feed. And so you can then see everything beyond your local targets. So gives you much more warning of where of what's out there and things to avoid. And so again, we can plan ahead. As I mentioned, we can look at the ocean data in here, which I didn't just download, but it is there. And if I come in here, I don't know which one I downloaded. Should be there. Anyhow, we do have it. We can download it. I probably need to go and do another download. I can download all that information and have it in there. And the same as what we looked at before, we can see all that, our current data with our routes. Just before I wrap this up, you can see here that our routes in this particular instance do pretty much line up. And so what we would do here is we'd go, okay, that's cool. We're happy. They all line up if we were doing this passage. I'll just turn my AIS off, and I might sail to here, and then I would do another download. And so even if I had to sail to out here before I did another download, there's not a massive split in the models. The models all pretty much agree with what's happening there. Unlike before, when it went light, it's not trying to send us all over the place. We've got a solid breeze, and all the models agree, so the routes are lining up. Anyhow, I will stop sharing that. So we would just do another download there. So there's just mentioned before about the downloads, the model updates. So generally most of those models, the global models, update twice a day. Some update more regularly, but we would generally do an update after we knew that the models had updated. And so then we'd update our weather routing so that we've got new weather, because the best forecast is the most recent one. And so we want to keep updating our weather, updating our route as we go along. All right. So I will wrap that up there. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. As I mentioned at the start, if you have any questions, please reach out to our support team. They are there to help you, and will answer any questions you have about using the routing, setting it up, polars, you name it. They are awesome and are there to help you out. Thank you.